France and Italy have rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's claim that NATO members will increase military spending. French President Emmanuel Macron said France only remains committed to boosting its military budget to 2% of its GDP by 2024. And Italian Prime Minister Giuseppe Conte also said that he doesn't promise to increase his country's military spending either. Trump claimed other NATO members had agreed to increase their military budget to 4% of their GDP. Have a listen.
I told people that I'd be very unhappy if they didn't up their commitments very substantially, because the United States has been paying a tremendous amount, probably 90% of the cost of NATO. And now people are going to start, and countries are going to start upping their commitments. So I let them know yesterday, actually. I was surprised that you didn't pick it up. It took till today. But yesterday, I let them know that I was extremely unhappy with what was happening, and they have substantially upped their commitment. Yeah. And now we're very happy and have a very, very powerful, very, very strong NATO, much stronger than it was 2 days ago. Well, they were probably worried because the United States was not being treated fairly, but now we are, because the commitment has...
The U.S. President was speaking after a NATO summit in Brussels. Trump had threatened to withdraw his country from the Western military organization if allies didn't meet his spending target. Now we're going to swing over to Niagara Falls. We're joined by a political commentator, Jason Unruhe. Hello, Jason. Thanks for joining us back on the program. Jason, so who are we supposed to believe? The U.S. President, Macron, or Conte?
Well, I think at this point there's very little credibility that can be given to Donald Trump or anything that he says. As we saw previously, he claimed that the other NATO allies weren't pulling their weight, yet they very clearly were. He said they weren't paying enough when they were already paying the 2% of their defense budget that they had previously agreed to as a part of NATO. So on this account, he has already lied. So I don't really think that Trump has any credibility in this regard. But I think it's important to keep in mind that this is all coming out of a two-day meeting with the NATO forces, where they were trying to discuss, their tactical stance towards the conflicts in the world that they are facing, or at least they want to be a part of, or at least have a hand in. Now, Trump said he was kind of optimistic that things had been worked out, but he didn't specify which countries had committed to what. I mean, he claimed that countries said that they would step in and help, and they would do X amount of work, but he didn't specify what. He didn't say who said they would do what, or who said what they would give. There's no immediate specifics on anything that may have been achieved. So this leaves a big question as to whether anybody had really agreed to anything at all. Well, I'm certain that they did discuss among themselves what they were going to do, but this lack of clarity, the lack of specifics that we usually see from Donald Trump, leaves a very large question mark in this situation as to what perhaps even Trump himself meant.
Well, he's even threatened to opt out of NATO, and ultimately we know that in large part could be very complicated, possibly even a pipe dream and just an empty, hollow threat or just smoke. But ultimately, if that was even a possible scenario to entertain, I mean, who would end up the loser there? Would it be the European allies, or would it be Washington? Because we know that NATO does, about 90% of, and he says that we're paying 90% of the budget. Guess what? NATO is 90% a Washington vessel to try to dictate what is what in Europe.
Oh, absolutely. The United States is completely bluffing when they say they're going to pull out of NATO. NATO was their creation to counter the Soviet Union, and as you said, they do 90% of the funding for the organization. I mean, a few people have any illusion that NATO does anything but carry out U.S. interests in various regions, and I think to a lesser degree they also carry out the interests of some of the other imperialist countries as well, those who are junior partners in imperialism, with the U.S. being the primary. The U.S. is completely bluffing when they say this. This is tantamount to saying that they're going to put down their weapons and refuse to fight for their own interests across the world in whatever theater they feel they need to do so. I mean, it's not going to happen. The U.S. is not going to simply abandon an organization such as NATO, which has the veneer of cooperation of various countries. It is the point of the organization is to make it look like they're not acting unilaterally when they very much are, and telling others to go along with it. So I don't think that they really want to get rid of this thin cover that they already have, because I think that stripping away too much of the face from the reality of imperialism might not be the best strategy to take at this point. As it is, the United States is already being criticized for taking unilateral actions on multiple fields, foreign policy towards Iran and Venezuela, to completely trashing long-standing economic agreements, trade agreements that have existed between countries. If anything exemplified the idea of a rogue state, it would be the United States. And I think a membership in NATO is something that, at least for their public image, they certainly need to keep a hold of.
Thanks for joining us and your valuable perspective, Jason Unruhe, political commentator, joining us out of Niagara Falls.